Good morning, Daylight. I hope everybody had a great New Year's Day and geared up for a great year. We are going to do things kind of different today. If you've been here for a while, then you'll find out that every service is not exactly the same. A lot of them have the same feel, but today's going to be quite a bit different. And so you're probably used to us doing announcements and taking up the offering and that kind of thing right now. We're not going to do that until the end of the service because today is our 2015 State of Daylight address. And my hope is, and it's going to take a little bit more time than usual, but my hope is that you guys will be as excited and motivated about Daylight Church as I am. I've been reading a book about successful churches, and one of them talks about how churches that do well and that grow have a sense of ownership and entitlement, that the people who attend own the church. And you can't just have one charismatic guy up front that does a good job, that's very handsome. That just doesn't quite do the job. You got to have people who are excited. And so my hope is that you're going to get excited. So we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going. And to start that off, I'm going to ask my daughter, Elena, to come. If you would bring her up here, Andy. And I'm going to introduce you to a couple people. This is her. This is Elena. And I know it's not cool to just stare at other people's kids. I get that. But I mean, come on. Look at her. So this is her. Hey, baby doll. How are you? You don't have a clue what's about to happen, do you? This is her. And Elena was born in March of last year. And she is tied into Daylight Church because of this guy right here. His name is Titus Owakushe. And I know you're looking at him and looking at her and thinking, I don't see any connection. But I brought a resume from Titus Owakushe with me. Titus is a very dear friend of mine, and he is a PhD professor in Delaware. And this is his resume. It's 14 pages long. It's pretty ridiculous, all the professional journals he's been published in. Titus is the kind of guy that the United Nations calls and says, hey, why don't you come over for a summit in Belgium because we're trying to figure out the socioeconomic situation in Uganda, and we could really use your help. That's the kind of guy he is. And here's one of the journals that he wrote. It's called Nonlinear Dynamics in the Export-Output Growth Nexus, a time-varying smooth transition autoregressive modeling approach. So, real brainiac, and also a Jesus-loving, Jesus-centered guy like you've never met in your life. And he's the kind of guy that when he's in a room and he speaks, everybody leans forward to hear. I've been in meetings with Titus where he didn't say anything. We'd be hashing something out for an hour and a half, and then finally Titus would say, and he says it in like this Nigerian Yul Brynner voice, which I'm not going to attempt, but he said, hey, you want to do that? He'll say, well, have you considered this? And everybody in the room will go, oh, of course, why didn't we ask Titus in the beginning? But I was on the phone with Titus because we started fundraising for Daylight Church, and this was a year and a half ago. Called him up, said, Titus, we're going to do this project in Louisville. We're going to start a church. And he said, yeah, of course we'll support you. So he's one of our financial supporters that's helping make this church possible. But on the phone, he's also very prophetic. And for those of you not familiar with that term, it means he has this capacity to hear from God and to speak in people's lives. And I've seen it happen over and over. But on the phone that day, he said, HL, I think God wants you to know something. I said, what's that, Titus? And so I'm leaning into the phone because I've learned enough about Titus to know to do that. He says, because he knew Lena was going to be born in March, and he knew the church was going to be born right around that time, he said, as goes your daughter, so goes the church. And he said, you're going to be able to gauge the maturity level of the church and where the church should be based on the maturity level of your daughter. He said, so when the day comes that she's pooping in her diapers and drooling all over the place, you can just look at your church and say, it's okay that the church is pooping in their diapers and drooling all over the place. He says, but eventually the day is going to come where she's going to start pulling herself up on the furniture and she's going to start trying to walk on her own. Yeah, you preach it. Tell them. This is your first chance. You're taking advantage. But he said the day will come that she's walking, and the day will come that she's going to school on her own, and the day will come when she grows up and drives a car. And he says, just watch her and feel okay about where you're at. And that has helped me so much because, I don't know, a few weeks ago we had a service where I preached a lousy message and you guys kind of just stared at me drooling. And we had like 50 people show up and the offering was $215. And I went home just, ugh. And I remember holding her that day. You want to do this? You want to do that? Is that better? I remember her holding her that day and literally drool falling out of her mouth in a stream onto my chest. And I thought, it's all good. It's okay. And we are a new church. And I know we've got some new people coming in today. I know you can sense that. This is a new church. These guys don't have a clue what they're doing. But you know what? We're babies pooping in our diapers, and it's all good. And it's going to be good. But you know what? We also see potential. So when she was born, we named her appropriately. Her name's Elena Ray, and it means, dear child, a shining light, a torch. Beautiful. So we tied it into the daylight concept because I don't want to sell you on daylight church today as much as I want to sell you on the daylight. Hey, here? Let's try something. Hey, I'm gonna give this a shot and see if it'll work. Lena, hey, look at me. Will you do me a favor? Will you patty cake for us? Will you do the patty cake? You want whoever's over there more? Okay. I knew it wouldn't happen. Randy, will you come and get her? So she's patty caking lately. So this is where we're at as a church. Is we fail to patty cake when we're supposed to, but it's all good. Now, so some of you have heard a little bit of our history. I'm gonna back up and tell some of it that you haven't heard, some details that you may have missed, and some stuff that you've probably heard once or twice, but you're going to get to hear it again today. I worked at a campus ministry for years. Never wanted to be a pastor. I had written a couple books. I was traveling both nationally and internationally, teaching at conferences, and that's an easy job. They put you up in nice hotels and they feed you well. It's a good job. Never wanted to be a pastor. But about 3 years ago during the summer, a pastorate was offered to me of a pretty successful church. I mean, depending on how you gauge success, but I mean, it was a booming, thriving church. And they said, hey, and the pastor calls me up. He says, I hate to do this to you, but I'm leaving next Sunday. I'm out of here. And he said, you're the obvious choice. I want you to be the pastor, but I need to know right now. I need to know this week because I'm out of here Sunday and I'd like to turn you over to our people on Sunday night at a meeting. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I go home, never wanted to be a pastor, talk to my wife. We prayed all night. We stayed up all night talking about it and praying, and the answer was going to be yes. I don't know why. It just felt right. It seemed right. And so we decided we were going to go that route. But we took a few days to just wait and see. And over the few days after that, we found out there was a lot of political junk going on underneath in the underpinnings of the church, kind of ugly stuff, and backbiting and people fighting. And so thankfully, the pastor actually withdrew the offer. He said, hey, this stuff's going on. He was very upfront and open about it because it had all started as a result of him leaving. It was just a mess. He said, I'm not going to hand you a mess. So he decided to gut it out. He's still there to this day. He gutted it out. The church is doing well. But it opened my eyes to the fact that I might want to pastor someday. But it also opened my eyes that I don't want to inherit somebody else's crap. I don't know if I can say that in church, but I just did. I don't want it. If we're going to start a church, man, we'll just cast a fresh vision and we'll get some new people and we'll go forward. And so a few months after that, I'm at a minister's meeting, and the guy is preaching about church planting here in Kentucky. And he's a pretty conservative guy, and he was preaching to very conservative people. I'm going to guess that 40 or 50% of the men in the room and the ladies in the room, because they have lady preachers, but they wear suits and ties and dresses to go to church and to preach. So they're suit and tie preachers. And he's telling a story about a church he went to here in Kentucky where he walked into the foyer and a guy met him in blue jeans with holes in them and a white t-shirt. He said it wasn't even a nice white t-shirt. He said it was a Hanes Pack white t-shirt. And he goes into the service, and this conservative guy notices that the guy he met in the foyer in the Hanes Pack t-shirt is the pastor of the church. And he says, guys, it's the most powerful service I've been in years. And I remember him doing this on the pulpit. He said, we need churches like that in Kentucky. He didn't knock stuff over when he did it, but that's what he did. He said, we need churches like that in Kentucky. And I have this ongoing dialogue with Jesus that goes on in my head all the time. And so when he said that, I turned to Jesus, kind of figuratively, and I said, I could do that. And the best thing I know to tell you is that it's everything I've thought of since that day. I told Jesus that while he was preaching, I said, if I ever did pastor a church, I said I wanted to have a really cool name, a name that nobody else has. And immediately, Daylight Church popped in my head. I'd never heard of Daylight Church, never thought of it. I thought, surely there's a bunch of Daylight churches out there. So while he's preaching, I get on my phone. I got it down here so you can't see. And I'm looking, and daylightchurch.com is available. And I look around, and there's one other Daylight Church in the country. It's Daylight Christian Community Center Church. It's a primarily African-American church in Detroit. And they own Daylight Christian Community something.com. So while he's preaching, I buy daylightchurch.com. And so and I went home and started developing it. Started telling people. Went home to Kara, my wife, and said, babe, I think we ought to move to Louisville and start a church. We'll talk a little bit why Louisville in a second. She said, okay, let's do it. And so we started moving down that path. And the next day I woke up and I bought all kinds of books on Amazon on how to plant a church and how to pastor a church, because I don't have a clue. You guys can tell, I don't have a clue. I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't know what I was doing then, and 20 years from now, I'll be like, I don't have a clue. But there's people that do. So I went on and I bought a stack of books about this tall. Some of them are on this list. Planting Missional Churches by Ed Stetzer was one of the ones I bought. The Nuts and Bolts of Church Planting, that's one of the ones I bought and read. I read both of those, didn't read the top two. But just went down the list and bought a bunch of books and started reading. How do you plant a church? What does that even mean to plant a church? Because I don't know. So I started checking into it. And then I had two major concerns. It was the campus ministry I was involved with. The campus pastor there was a great friend of mine that I'd been with for 20 years. I knew it was going to be heartbreaking for him, for us to leave. And so I sat down in a little cafe with him. This is Mark and my son, Siler. And a little cafe like this with tables that close together. And I said, Mark, I think I'm going to move to Louisville and start a church. Kara and I have talked about it, and we're pretty sure we're going to do it. He doesn't even say anything. He just starts crying. It was so awful. It was terrible. For like 45 minutes, the guy just sits there and cries and tries to talk and cries. Those of you that know him, you get it. He never cried out loud. He would always go. That's how Mark cried. Sad movies, you'd see him out of the corner of your eye. We did it for 45 minutes. Next day, he and I are on the phone. Actually, let me back up for a second. He and I are on the phone, and he says, H, he said, I really think you need to fast and pray and think about this. And I think, he said, if you're going to make a radical move like this, you got to hear from God, know that you're called. I said, Mark, I don't even know if that's my theology. I said, I don't think I believe that. I think you ought to just go do something with your life. And God's fully capable of stopping you. I think, man, live some adventure and some excitement and take some risks. We can talk about my theology on that later, but after we get off the phone, I look down, I'm in my office pacing while I'm on the phone with him, and I look down on my bookcase, and this book is sitting there that I'd never noticed before. It's called Chasing Daylight by Erwin McManus. So as soon as we got off the phone, I'm like, what's that all about? And I pick it up and open it, and the whole book is this concept of just take some risks. Just go do something with your life. He says, most people do nothing out of fear of doing the wrong thing. He says things like this. He says, I'm going to put it crassly. He says, if you love God with all your heart, you can do what you want. You can chew on that later, think about that for a while, but it opened my eyes. And my other concern was my mom, who you'll see here on the right picture. Mom was on disability. She was widowed. She was living in an apartment of mine, $275 a month rent, including utilities. We're just taking care of her. And we had grandkids and a grandchild on the way, and I'm not sure about the dates there, but close. So we got a family. We're close by. She loves it, and I'm just torn up about leaving her and moving to Louisville, even if it's only 4 hours away. And this is crazy. And my theology won't reflect what you're going to think it reflects when I say this, but both of these individuals have passed away since then. It's insane. These were my only two hindrances to coming here. Now, I don't think God killed them. I don't think God said, well, AHL is going to go plant a church, so you're out of here and we're putting you in my garden here in heaven. That's just absurd, ridiculous theology. But I believe God knows a whole bunch of stuff. I believe He can see things coming. He's got things under control. And so you hate to show that slide and say it's pretty neat how God works, but I'm free over here. I don't have a lot of concerns. And so I started reading, how do you start a church? And it said you need 4 people. Like several experts said, you got to find your 4 people. One is the leader that I talked about earlier, a charismatic guy who can, or lady, that can preach and draw people in and entertain people and coordinate and lead and cast a vision and all these jobs. And like I said, it said if he's really good looking and everybody laughs at his jokes, that's exceptional too. And so I thought, check. We got that. Good to go. And I posted this picture on Facebook recently, and somebody posted this meme in response. The second person you need is a great kids minister. That's the three reasons people stick in a church, is the preaching, the kids ministry, and the music. And we'll get to that in a second. So I called up Liz Woods. Liz Woods was teaching English to international students at Murray State University at the time. Years ago, I told Liz, I said, if I was to ever pastor a church, I would make you my pastor of awesomeness. And your official job description would be to be awesome. And you could figure that out and do whatever you wanted to do, because that's the kind of person she is. She's just awesome. So I called Liz up and said, Liz, have you ever thought about doing kids ministry? She said, all the time. I said, what are you going to do next year? She said, I don't know. And I thought, yeah, this is good. So I said, Liz, you want to move to Louisville and start a church? She said, yes, I do. So she did, and now she's working at U of L, teaching English there, and leading our kids ministry. So that was a big boost. Then I called up these guys over here, Carl and Kaylee, who are actually have a third with them right now. They're Prego, and that's pretty exciting. But I called them up one day, and there was a bind because they were already involved in another church. But I called their pastor and said, hey, I'm thinking about calling Carl and Kaylee. He said, go ahead, feel free to do that. So I did, and it worked out great. Called them up, said, hey, I'm going to start a church. They told me the next day that night they stayed up in their apartment dancing around. They were so excited. And Kaylee became our music leader right away. She's a gifted musician. You have a master's degree in music, right? Music ed. She teaches music education, and super excited to have her. And then the fourth person they say you need is your go-to guy, your go-to gal. It's this person who will just do anything. They'll carry heavy stuff. They'll do what you ask them to do. They'll show up on time. So I asked Carl, I said, well, what do you want to do? And really, one of the very first things he said, well, I can carry stuff. Didn't you? He did. He said, man, I just want to help however I can, whatever I can do, I'll do it. And then I started calling some other friends. I called up these beautiful ladies on the right. When I called Jessica Johnson, the blonde on the right, she said, HL. When I told her, she said, HL, I'm trying to use my low voice here. I said, Jess, just do what you ever need to do. And she goes, on the phone. And she says, she's from Lexington. She said, I'm going to come to your church. She said, I'm going to start tithing to your church. I thought, that's a win. That's good, right? That's a start. These other ladies, Julie started doing our hospitality ministry. Katie started doing our connection stuff, and they were on board. And then a few months later, the fifth guy that they don't tell you in the books that you have to have a Chris Booker. And I was thinking about it this morning, and this is no insult to the other three. If I had to go somewhere else and plant a church and I could only take one of them with me, don't tell the other guys, but it's Booker. You can't do it without your tech guy. They didn't tell me that, but when he showed up, it was like, oh, yes, finally, we can make this stuff happen. And so we had some people, we had a vision, we had an idea, but then what's next? Well, the experts say you got to write up your church proposal. So that's what we did. It's like a 18-page or 14-page document on who you are, why you're doing this, why Louisville, what's it going to take, what's your suggested timeline, what kind of money do you need, and where will that money go? And you're supposed to start shipping that to people all over the place and then making meetings with them and face-to-face because you got to come up with money. Now, when I was doing my church proposal, I found out a few cool things. I found out that Louisville is a really amazing place. And during this process, I remembered something that happened years ago that I hadn't thought of in a long time, and it involves this guy right here. This guy, Jay Covert, is an inner-city missionary to East St. Louis. And he came up to me. We were always giving each other a hard time when we were around one another. He came up to me at a meeting, and this was I'll bet this was 12 years ago. He snuck up behind my seat, and he said, HL. I said, what? While the preaching's going on, he says, you're going to plant a church in Louisville one day. I said, man, get out of here. Slapped him away. And I didn't even think about that until partway through this process, I remembered him doing that. I don't, is that a miracle or is that bad pizza? I don't know what that is, but it's pretty cool. I found out that Louisville is the #1 city in America for drawing and maintaining post-college educated people in the age 25 to 39 category. It beats Portland, San Antonio, Houston, Austin, all of them. People in that age group with that education are coming here in droves and spending the rest of their lives. 14 of the top 25 Forbes 500 companies have bases in Louisville. Did you know that? This is an impressive city with impressive people. And that's right up our niche. The people you saw on our team, we all came through college ministry together. We've made no bones about the fact that we are targeting 20 to 40-year-olds, and with our worship style and our music and the video clips and stuff, but it's so cool that our average age in here is probably 50, 55. It's been awesome. Thrilled about that. But we found out that those people are here and they're staying. We also found this out. You may not know this, but Lonely Planet said that Louisville was their #1 travel destination in 2013. Over Jekyll Island, Georgia, and all these beautiful beaches all over the place. Louisville. I don't tend to agree, but it's still pretty cool that they did that. Now, we had to raise money. So we started out sending packets and we started making phone calls. And they say make a list and you start with what they call your big dogs first. Like these are the sure things. And they're people with means, so they're rich people, and they're people that you feel pretty confident will want to be a part of what you're doing. And so they say make a list and pick your top 3 and target those people first. And this is probably where the majority of your money will come from for a church plant. So I made my list. And at the top of it was a guy. He's a doctor over doctors, and he had supported our campus ministry in the past very generously. And so I sent him a packet, called him up, and they didn't answer the phone. His wife, I eventually got a hold of his wife, called 2 or 3 different times, and had never had trouble getting a hold of him before. And on the phone, she says, "Yeah, we read your packet, and we just decided we're just not interested in investing in this right now." I said, "Okay, well, that's disappointing." And she said, "We just don't understand why you need another church in Louisville." Oh, God. It was because this is the one that's supposed to launch your motivation and make you feel like things are going to happen. And she just said, "Get out of here. Not interested." But I call up our second guy, and the second guy's a pretty neat story in and of itself. And I have to backtrack a little bit. 10 years ago, I was teaching a series on outreach and evangelism at a church. And between sessions, so I had taught one session, we were having snacks between sessions, and there was another session coming. And so we're sitting there eating snacks and crackers and cheese or whatever it was, and this woman comes up to me who I know to be a very vocal Christian. She says, "HL," she said, while we're all sitting there in this it was a hallway. We're all sitting in metal chairs in a hallway. She says, "HL, I want to pray for you." And I said, "Okay." I knew she was a woman who prays a lot. And I said, "All right, that's fine." And so she puts her hand on my shoulder and she starts praying. She says, "I have to tell you something." The whole thing's just really awkward. I said, "Okay." And she says, "God told me," because this was when I was traveling nationally inside the States. She said, "God told me that you're going to have doors open up internationally quickly, and that you need to take those doors and run through them, and that you're going to get several opportunities as a result of that." She said, "And on those trips, you're going to meet someone very affluent, and that person will help catapult your ministry and help you do what you do." And then she goes back to praying, and everybody goes back to eating their food, and we go to the next class. And honestly, with stuff like that, I'm a guy that, okay, if it unfolds, then it was true, and if it doesn't, then it wasn't. That's kind of how I view it. Well, like a week later, I get a call from a missionary in Brussels, Belgium. He says, "We're doing this conference here in Belgium, and we want you to come be one of the main speakers." And he says, people from all over the world will be there. We've got students coming from Africa, from Australia, from all over Europe, from Eastern and Western Europe, from Asia. They're all going to converge here for this event. We want you to be one of the main speakers. I said, "All right, let's do it." I also booked a side trip to Spain because I had missionary friends in Spain. So on that trip, I meet all these people, other doors open up, and I start having some international possibilities open up. And when I'm in Spain, the missionary says, "Hey, I'm supposed to preach at this international church this Sunday because the pastor's gone, so I'm supposed to fill in for him." He says, "Would you like to preach?" I said, "Yeah, I love to preach. Let's preach." So I preach. So I go to this international church in Madrid, Spain, and I preach. And afterwards, we have some books and DVDs and things like that, and this family comes to the table and wants some books and wants them signed, and they want their picture taken with me, which all that is always so crazy to me. But they want their picture taken with me, and he says, "Hey, I'm from St. Louis, and I'm from Murray, Kentucky. Wow, we're 4 hours away." He says, "You should come preach at my church sometime." I said, "Well, hook me up." And he says, "I sit on the board of this apologetics conference that goes on there. You should preach at that too." So I said, "Yeah." Well, anyway, the two of us become friends. I go to St. Louis and connect. The guy is exceedingly wealthy. It's more money than any of you have ever seen in this room. He's a very, very wealthy guy. So he's number 2 on my list. So the first group says, no thanks, not interested. So I call up the second guy, and I call him by name, say, "This is what we're doing. I'd sent you my packet." I said, "Do you want me to drive to St. Louis and talk about it?" He said, "No, there's no need." He said, "Listen," he said, we're just doing a lot of giving this year." And I kind of went, "Oh, no." He said, "Our church is doing this building program, and we've got this ministry we're involved in, and this other ministry we're involved in." And he says, "So I can't do much." He says, we can only send $2,000 a month. I thought, that'll do. That's good. It's a good start. I'm sorry that you can't do more of it. So the second guy says, we'll send $2,000 a month. So for the last year, that's what he's done. This year, he's re-upping at $1,500 a month. So we're doing fairly well until December of next year. We're doing okay, all right? Now, the third person said, yeah, we'll do it, and never did. They tell you when you're raising funds that you'll be shocked at who gives and you'll be shocked at who doesn't. And that was my experience. People would say, yeah, we're going to give, and then you'd never see them again, which just gets terrible. You know, you just don't want to contact them on Facebook after that. And so you have to contact people and say, hey, it's totally cool. Everything's cool. We're friends. I ain't mad at you. It's all good. But this organization that we approached, we said, hey, we're planting a church in Louisville, and they funded church planners, and we were connected with them quite closely, actually. Called them up, said, hey, let's meet. Let's talk about the vision. And the head guy calls me a week before we're supposed to meet. He says, listen, HL, he said, I just feel like I need to make this clear to you. These are our policies about giving. And one of those policies was that you have to have a person on your, they have to have representation on your board in order to give. Now, I learned three things from the experts. I learned that there were three things that will crush you as a church plant. Number one is if your spouse is not behind it. And Kara's been on board from the very beginning. She's the one over here on that side. She's been on the board from the beginning. We never had any concerns. The second is if you launch too early. You don't have enough people to sustain what's about to happen. So we were real careful about that, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the third was the wrong people on your board. So if you get the wrong people on your board, it will suck the life out of you, and it can happen quickly. Now, this organization, I trusted their leadership, but I also know their leadership rotates in and out, so I don't know who would be on our board 10 years from now. So I had to tell the guy, I said, look, I desire the board more than I desire the money. And it's disappointing, but I'm sorry. You know, we're just not going to take the money and we'll just move on with life. He says, well, he says, we'd still like to hear about what you're doing. And I said, okay, well, we'll meet Monday and we'll do that. We get off the phone. I called Kara in the room. I said, Kara, we need to pray that for the first time in this organization's history, they will fund a church that they have no representation on. So that's what we prayed. We prayed those exact words. God, we pray in Jesus' name that this would happen. So we go to the meeting on Monday. We sit, they grill us on our vision for about 45 minutes or an hour. They send us out of the room. We go sit and drink coffee or whatever while they chat things out. We come in and they're all standing. And the head guy says, HL, he says, we've thought about it, we've talked about it. And he says these words. He says, for the first time in our organization's history, we want to fund a church that we won't have any representation on. That's a paraphrase, but what I had prayed was exactly what he said. So he said, we're going to send you $10,000 between now and the end of the year, which they did, which was our mailer. That's what paid for our mailer, which brought some of you guys here. But you see, that it just seemed like here and there, God was just pushing us in this direction. So we got a little bit of money. We've got a decent-looking team here. We've got a vision. We've got an idea. We need a location, and I approached the Mega Cavern. I said, guys, we really want to have a church in a cave. And they said no, so we moved on. But I thought that would be awesome. And it doesn't quite make sense to have daylight church in a cave, but I'd still do it if they offered it to me today. That would be sweet. We could make that happen. So I approached this place. This was my second choice. Stony Brook 20 Theaters. You guys have probably heard of this. So funny, I told our team today that those would fall over if you set them up like that. It's because I know stuff. I approached the manager. I literally walked in the room, asked for the manager, talked to her, and 2 minutes later it was a done deal. She had managed a theater in Nashville where they had 2 different churches or 3 different churches coming out. She knew the ropes. She said, here's what you're going to need. You're going to need this, 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 and this, and we'll put advertising here, and we'll put our banner out. Had 4 people that showed up today because of the banner out in the lobby. She said, we'll do this. So she just said, here. This is what it'll cost. Boom, here's the right people to talk to. Bam, done. Sealed. I mean, it was just my second choice of location, which is probably even a better location. And so we started meeting, doing monthly services in Theater 1, which seats 97 people, back in May. And these were like practice services. This is like, is the microphone going to work? These speakers that we bought on Craigslist, are we going to be able to fire those up week after week? And so it worked. And then these 2 guys got involved. Where's Pat and Pete Wright? Yeah, I love Pat and Pete Wright. Pat and Pete Wright are the parents of one of my best friends from Murray State University. Paul Lyle, who's led music for us a couple times. And we chatted, and I didn't want to pull them away from any kind of a church, and I didn't want to take for granted that they would want to get involved, but they approached me and said, hey, we want to do this. We want to stick around for at least a year. And I'll note that this week marks over a year, and they're still here, and I'm pretty excited about that. But they wanted on board, and then they invited this lovely lady, Karen Canary, who is right over here. Karen likes her ice cream, apparently. And when I met Karen, I said, you need to invite your friends to this thing. She said, I don't have any friends. I said, well, invite somebody. She said, I don't have anybody to invite. And I'll bet if we took a show of hands, about 10% of you that are in the room right now came because of Karen. She goes to her knitting club and says, hey, there they are. Says hey, we got this church thing going on. And they said, okay, well, come check it out. And I could tell they were skeptical at first. They came in and looked around, and a couple of them, they still get up and they come to this church. Then they go to the Methodist church they've been attending for years right after this service is over. But Karen, she said, I don't have any friends, and yet she single-handedly is building this church. Her daughter Stephanie and her husband Josh have been coming. Then Alona and Bill DeGoyer started coming. Yeah. And so, you see, we just had a team of 8, and then things just started to happen a little bit. And we turned that team into about 35 people by the time launch came around in September. And in launch, we did our big marketing campaign, and this was the result, which was pretty exciting. We had 142 people come. They say that if you can hit the 150 mark at launch, your odds of success go way up. See, there's 2 methods of planning a church. One is the slow growth part. It's you start in a room, and you have a little cell group, and you try to grow a little bit and grow a little bit, and then you get out of that room and move to a hotel. And statistically, the odds of those church existing 3 years later, 10%. About 10% of church launches that start that way continue on. With the big launch, which is the model we go to, you got about a 50% chance of survival. Now, if you can hit that 150 mark on your launch, your odds start going up. You've got a much better chance of being around 3 years later. And I hope that you hope, like I hope, that we're going to be here in 3 years. I think it's going to be awesome. So this has been our average attendance since then. It's so funny. The experts say half will come back. That's what they say. They say if you got 150, you're going to see 75 stick around. We had 140. We've had 67 stick around. We've had as high as 93 and as low as 51. But our average, even if you ditch those outliers, 67 people. And so 67 is a great, great group to start a church with. There's 2 ways churches die. One is the trickle slow death. And that means basically that Bill and Alona next week get offended at something I say, which is probably going to happen at some point. Let's just face it. And then Brodsky up there gets a job somewhere. He says, I'm out of here. And it just goes from 67 to 61, 55. And then the pastor goes, why did I quit my job? Why did I do this? That's one way. The other way is financial. You just can't pay the bills. And so then you regress and you end up going back to the hotel room and then back to the living room. And that's another way it does. But this is pretty interesting. They say you need 100 people in regular attendance to sustain a church financially. That in order for a church to be self-sustaining financially, 100 is about the mark. And it depends on local demographics and finances. But this is pretty neat, guys. We have a ministry of 67%, and we're already meeting 74.1% of our necessary monthly expenses, which means we're doing much better than the average church. It means there's this combination of us being thrifty, we buy our stuff on Craigslist, and you guys giving well, and we're doing better than the average. Now, this number isn't scary because, like I said, a lot of our supporters picked us up for another year. But it also does mean that over the next year, we need to grow. We need to grow in our giving. We need to grow as a church, people filling the seats. That's one way to make that happen. But right now, we're in a great spot. We're not going bankrupt. We've got money in the bank that we're saving. We're giving away. We've given away, I don't know, $4,000 in the last 3 months to different charities, $3,000 to $4,000, something like that, to different charities and missionaries around the world. And that money is just going to continue to climb. And so we're very, very healthy for a baby that's pooping in its diapers and drooling. We're in a great, great spot. And then we've done some outreach. I'm closing up here soon. Bear with me. We've done some really neat outreach. In 3 months, we went to Camp Crestwood, which is a camp nearby for kids that come in for church camp every year. And some of these people were on this team. And we tore down fences for them and helped them haul fences off because they needed manual labor to do what they do. So obviously Ellen took the job seriously. She was working hard that day. These guys busted their tails that day. Then we worked with Teen Challenge for one of their graduation programs. They help girls through alcohol and drug addiction, primarily drug addiction. And if you look at the picture Second from the left on the top, those are the two ladies that graduated that day. The one on the right started using cocaine when she was 10 years old. The one on the left started using drugs when she was 12. And today, these girls have been free of drug addiction for about a year. And their statistical odds of going forward free are very high in Teen Challenge. But we blessed them that day by putting on the graduation, supplying the food, serving the food. Eleanor knit some very beautiful quilts you can see. Trades of Hope gave these necklaces to each. That was a redemption necklace that has a really neat message, and so we sent them home with gifts. But it was we're just a tiny little nothing church drooling on ourselves, but we're already starting to invest in people. And then we've baptized 5 people, which was pretty cool. I'll tell you, one of the highlights for me this whole 3 months was sitting with Damon Stever back there at a park over at Dupre Park talking about his relationship with God. Sorry to embarrass you, man, but you're awesome. And I asked him, I said, do you want God in your life? Do you want to follow Jesus? And he said yes, and not to embarrass him, but in tears, he bowed his head right there and prayed, Jesus, please, come into my life. Help me. Let me be yours. That's the moment for me. And all that. I like all you guys, but that was it. Sitting at that park that day. He got baptized a week later. And so we've seen some neat things happen. I've had a couple other events that sum it up. When we were doing our preview services, I remember Laura Rennert coming in. She's not here today, but she came in as a guest, had never heard of us, but she saw one of our signs, saw our banners out front. She came in and she sat in the seat right next to Jessica there. And I remember while the music was playing, Laura raising her hands, this first-time visitor, and just worshiping. And I sat over here and I just started crying like a little baby. And when I got up here, I was like wiping snot and it was embarrassing. But it was like this, there was this moment that I thought, this is going to happen. People will come in this theater and they will worship God. And God will touch lives. And then I remember at our communion service recently, Emily Burke sat right up here. I didn't see Emily. She might be here. But she said, hey, Emily. And she shared her testimony about how she didn't know how she was going to provide Christmas gifts for her son. But that God provided, that all this stuff started coming. And I've seen pictures. The kid had a stash. It was ridiculous. I was jealous of the kid's gifts. What's that? He did. It was like a pile of gifts this big with Wii's and all kinds of stuff. And I remember during our prayer, somebody, and I don't know who it was, but somebody came down and wrapped their arms around Emily and prayed for her. It was Karen Canary, go figure. The lady with no friends. She comes down, wraps her arms around her and prays for her. And I thought, that's it. That's what we're shooting for. That's what's going to happen here. And there have been other things like that I won't go into. You guys might not know this, but our web presence is pretty exceptional at this point. We've had about 1,900 plays on our sermons on the website in 3 months. 1,900. About 200 of those have come from overseas. They come from all these. You probably. Oh, maybe it's not on there. It's on here. This is kind of a map, and so you can't read that. It's Taiwan and Canada and Czech Republic and Belgium and Poland, Jamaica, Thailand, Philippines. And so people from all over the country are, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense to me. They're going to listen to what I'm saying today in Thailand. That's crazy. Now, when my wife preached, she had like 120 plays on her video in 3 days. I haven't had 120 plays on any of my videos from the beginning. I don't get it. Somebody does. I got this Facebook message this week from a guy. He said, I can't thank you enough for posting the sermons. I've been in a dry spell with God. You've encouraged me to get back into the Word and to find ways to reach out in the community or notice people around me again. Thank you. You're making a difference, and I hope your church is growing wonderfully. God bless you. And I've gotten several messages from people, probably a dozen or 2 dozen messages from people that say the same thing. I'm not going to your church, but I follow you guys every week. And so it's bigger than what happens in this room. It's pretty exciting. So what's next? That's where we've been. That's kind of where we're at. What's next? 2 weeks from now, we're starting a series on apologetics. It's on being a brainy Christian, wicked smart Christians. If you haven't seen that sermon, go back on the website and watch it. Wicked smart believers. It's about having a brain, having answers, knowing why you believe what you believe. Being able to answer the difficult questions of faith. And we're going to be I just bought 11,000 of these, which I have out in my truck, so somebody needs to grab the keys and get those, Carl, if you wouldn't mind. See, he carries the heavy stuff. At some point, grab the keys, go to the truck, get that box in the passenger seat. There's about 11,000 of these sticky notes. So they just rip them off and you stick them on stuff, and they look exactly like that. So they're custom-made 3M sticky tabs, and it's perfectly legal to stick them on anybody's front door anywhere in this county. I called the cops and asked them. You can also stick them on cars in public places. So if you go down to J-Town and there's cars parallel parked everywhere, if you go around the public parks, just over and over, just go boom, 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 boom. So my hope is that you guys will grab about 50 or 100 of these each and distribute those over the next week. Then the week after that, we're going to get together on a Saturday, and we are going to go door to door and get rid of as many of these as possible. Plus, we've bought 100 movie tickets. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up shop right out here in front of the Stony Brook on Friday night and all day Saturday, and we're going to give people a 1 in 10 chance to win a free ticket. So we're going to have 10 envelopes, and one of them will contain a ticket, and all 10 of them will contain information about our new series. So we'll just say, hey, you want a chance to win a free ticket? Draw one of these. And whatever they draw, they're going to walk away with information about the church, and 1 out of 10 will walk away with a ticket. So I think that's a pretty cool outreach. And then we've also started a radio campaign that's going to last the next 2 weeks. It's going to be on primetime radio on 2 of the major stations. One of them is 100.5, and I don't know what the other one is. I can email or Facebook that if you're interested. But it's actually this ad, which I'm really uncomfortable to play with you guys. I'll talk in front of you, but then to hear my voice come out is awful and odd. But I'm going to do it. It's a 1-minute ad. Here it goes. In the 8th grade, I started doubting Christianity. I'd already been burnt by Santa Claus and Easter Bunny, and I didn't want it to happen again. So I asked a trusted church leader, why should I believe a dead man came back to life? Why believe the Bible came from God when men wrote it? His answer disappointed me. He said, you just have to accept it by faith. And even as a 13-year-old, I thought, that's a terrible answer. I carried my doubts into college, where I met people who weren't afraid of questions, and they helped me do my homework, and eventually I was convinced there are solid, rational reasons to embrace the Christian worldview. So I went all in. Today I'm the pastor at Daylight Church, a brand new church in Louisville, meeting at the Stony Brook 20 Theaters every Sunday at 9 a.m. And on January 18th, we're starting a series on Christians having a brain, asking tough questions, and searching for solid answers. And you can text in your questions during the sermons. For more info, check out daylightchurch.com. And don't forget to click our media tab and watch Wicked Smart Believers to get a taste of what's to come. We're Daylight Church, a church for not-so-churchy people. So that's pretty cool, I think. And that's going to start running. It should have started yesterday, but there may have been a mix-up, so it might start tomorrow. But I'll let you know. I'll put that on Facebook and email that out. I'm going to close with this idea. I hope that hearing the history, I hope you kind of feel what's happening here. It's easy to come into the seats and sit and think it's always been like this, but this time last year we had 8 people, and here we are. It's incredible. I mean, I couldn't be more excited about it. And I'm real excited to think, what are we going to look like at the State of the Church address next year? I think it's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. But I don't want to sell you on a church. I don't want to sell you on Daylight Church, although I love Daylight Church. This is the church I want to go to. I'm jealous of you guys. I want to come to church here. But it's not about a church. It's not the Daylight Church, it's the Daylight concept. And there's a song that I found, by a guy named Ike Ndolo. This is him. And it's a song where he talks about the house of the rising sun. And it goes like this. He says, the dark is groaning, the tomb is reaching out. Oh, but you can't have me. You can't have me. The crows are circling, the jackal waits in the dark. Oh, but you can't have me. You can't have me. I belong to the land of the rising sun, where the grave is no more. The war has been won. I belong to the land of the rising sun. I belong to you. I belong. And I love that the last line is just by itself. I belong. I think that's something people are hungry for. Is a place to belong, a place to be. He goes on, the world is in my bones. It makes me wrestle with you. Oh, but you have claimed me. You have claimed me. No matter how far I've gone, even to the devil's table. Oh my God, you've claimed me. You have claimed me. He goes into the chorus. I belong to the rising sun, land of the rising sun, where the grave is no more. The war has been won. The bridge, through my wondering and my failing and my doubting, I belong. Through the fire and the darkness and the sadness, I belong. Just a rebel who's tired of fighting, so I'm laying down these arms. And then, I'm such a baby. I'll cry at anything. But I was looking at this week and just sat and cried. It says, the sun is rising. I want to cry right now. Hold on. Give me a second. The sun is rising, the sun is rising, the sun is rising. And the Daylight concept, not the Daylight Church, but the Daylight concept is this, that there are people who have failed. There are people in darkness. There are people embittered, that the jackals are biting at their heels, that everything is awful, everything is terrible. They're making terrible mistakes. They don't know where to go. They're lost. They don't know which direction to turn. But there's a place to belong where the sun is rising. There's a place where you're walking through darkness. Everything, you seem blind, it's foggy, you don't know where where to reach. We want to be a place where you're walking through that darkness and then all of a sudden there's a light. There's something that becomes brighter and brighter. And that's our church verse. It says the path of the righteous is like the rising sun. It says basically the rays of the sun that slowly grow until the full light of day. So it's like being in a place of darkness and then there's a spark, there's something that calls you out and you can see it and you go towards it. And as you do, life starts to make sense. And people show up to help. And people hold your hand and they come and embrace you when you don't know how you're going to provide your kid Christmas gifts. And you come in here and you say, I'm messed up, I did this, and it's terrible, and I'm terrible. And we say, no, you're not. You're just in a lousy spot. That's the daylight idea, is that there's a place to belong where the sun is rising. And of course, we believe that that sun is Jesus. Jesus said this about himself. He said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I love that expression, light of life. I think that's something everybody's hungry for. I heard of missionaries over in Tibet that would approach people and say, do you know about eternal life? They'd say, no. Tell me. I've been searching, seeking. I think all over the world are people that want light. They want the light of life. And Jesus says, that's me. Jesus says, I am the light of life. That's the daylight concept, is that everyone will hear about this incredible light. His name was Jesus.